Hello, horror gamers! I've got a fairly recent release I want to talk about today, but first, thank you. Even though I'm just starting out, I was blown away by the reception to my Butcher's Creek video. Many of you left super kind, super encouraging comments, and I said, well, shit, I guess I'll keep on keeping on. I don't know what it is about the horror community that makes you guys so chill. It's gotta be the exposure therapy to mind-rending nightmares that makes you calm and nice. Seriously though, thank you. I would deserve a square crank upside my head if the red herb didn't cover such an obvious throwback to classic Resident Evil. Not even a hexagonal crank. That's how you know I'm serious. This is the first title from December Blues Games, a solo developer that began this project in 2021 by learning how to use Unreal Engine to develop a little game. The Mute House is a love letter to classic survival horror inked in blood. You could expect all the hallmarks of the genre: item management, tank controls, save rooms, puzzles, creeping monstrosities, and a cat. While it sticks pretty close to the formula Capcom popularized in 1996, it tosses its own ingredients in for a distinctive flavor. It really does feel like Resident Evil's brother from another mother. It nails the isolation of exploring a lonely manor in the middle of the night while unraveling its mysteries. It has an immaculate presentation with lavishly designed environments and stunning lighting effects. I thought the backgrounds were pre-rendered, given how meticulously detailed they are. It evokes the gothic realism of 2002's Resident Evil remake. And just listen to the save room theme. Oh, that's the good stuff. The game has one hell of an atmosphere. Survival horror tends to walk a fine line between fear and frustration. When the genre is at its best, you're given a tough but fair challenge that genuinely feels like you're surviving by the skin of your teeth. When the genre is at its worst, it can be a slog. The Mute House gets the fundamentals of old school horror right, but a few design flaws and some downright painful enemy encounters trip up an otherwise enjoyable walk down memory lane. I'll start at the start. It's 1999, and the world is busy celebrating the release of Deep Blue Sea. Elsewhere, in the town of Ashtown, a local police officer named Emily is searching for her missing sister. Her investigation leads her to a spooky mansion, and naturally she decides to enter the world of survival horror because I presume the door was unlocked. Inside, she has to contend with arcane puzzles, death traps, the living dead, and a cat. She eventually uncovers a sordid history of unethical experiments born from one man's desire to resurrect his dearly departed. The game's story is a grab bag of well-worn tropes, hammy voice work, and precisely dated files. I like some of the sad tales and Frankenstein shit described in these files, but the narrative isn't a focus here. It's B-movie background noise meant to explain why zombies and giant spiders roam the halls. So from what you see here, you'd be right to guess the game handles like classic
Resident Evil.
You use tank controls to navigate the house, solving puzzles that block your way while searching for keys to progress. You'll forage for ammo to defend yourself from whatever goes bump in the night, and look for healing items to keep yourself in the fight. You have a limited inventory, 6 slots to begin with, that you can expand to 8 later on. Dedicated save rooms let you catch your breath, save your progress, and use a cabinet to store items. Familiar, yeah? However, the Mute House has a couple of its own flourishes, other than that. For one, there's a sort of tactical reload. Unlike other games, reloading before your weapon is empty will actually discharge the clip, including any bullets left over. You can pick up dropped clips and even merge half-spent ones. The caveat here is that handgun clips only hold 8 rounds, and each clip takes up a full inventory slot. Shotgun shells only go up to 6. This forced me to be mindful of how much was chambered, which you can check while aiming, and how much was on person, adding a layer of ammo management onto ammo conservation. The emphasis on realism doesn't stop at the barrel, though. Storage cabinets, effectively this game's item boxes, are not magically linked like they are in Resident Evil. Whatever you store can only be retrieved from the cabinet you stored it in. I think this is a nod to Resident Evil Remake's Real Survival Mode, which uncouples item boxes for an extra challenge. I actually liked having to consider what I'm storing and where. It forced me to plan my excursions. Can I leave my shotgun here? Is this save room central enough? Should I leave an ammo ration here for future me? These trade-offs added a texture I had to think about, and that fits the survival part of survival horror. If the game were longer, it's about maybe 4 to 5 hours, these systems might have started to grate on me. Up until the midpoint of the game, zombies are pretty easy to take down, so I was often weighed down by ammo clips that kept me from picking up key items, necessitating a trip to a cabinet. Too much ammo is a good problem to have in a horror game, I know, but I think a slightly bigger clip would have cut down on redundant pack muling. Thankfully, the mute house isn't a very big house, so it's never far from a save room, making it a relatively low point of friction. If you want to talk about friction, let's talk about how the game has no map to speak of. None. The house may not be very big, but it is littered with locked doors, and it'd be great to have a better way to keep track of them than mental notes. Oh, and on the subject of intentional friction, opening up your inventory doesn't actually pause the game, it just slows it down, so be careful when you do it. While I got you here, I got another quibble. On a controller, I wish I could use my D-pad to sort through items in my inventory. Instead, you have this cursor that either moves slow or too slow. If you played
Resident Evil,
then you know how combat goes. You can auto-aim on the nearest threat and take pot shots until it's no longer a threat. What's cool is that you could switch to a manual aiming mode, denoted by this laser sight, and pinpoint your shot. I was able to pull off ammo-saving headshots that would have been impossible using auto-aim. It's a nice touch of modernity in a game steeped in the past. Another swerve are these gaseous flasks you can collect. They're extremely scarce, but using one will completely wipe an enemy off the board, even sturdier threats. It helps to save these up for harder fights later on. Whether they're zombies or worse, enemies are slow-moving, heat-seeking missiles. I can count the variety of enemy types in my hand, but I never really had to switch up tactics to contend with them. Put some distance between Emily and whatever's lurking at her, and they're not much of a problem. Get stuck in a crowd of them, Emily's problems are over. If you do end up taking damage, you could always treat your wounds with these fucking leeches. Yeah, you can gather leeches and perform herudotherapy on yourself. They heal you over time, but you lose the ability to sprint or quick turn while the little suckers do their magic. Honestly, I hope every old school throwback finds a zany replacement for herbs. Let me use aromatherapy to heal my wounds. Let me eat a ghost pepper. No other pain matters when your mouth is on fire, right? For survival horror veterans that consider a hard time a good time, beating the game unlocks an even harder mode. You have to find lantern oil to save, much like you have to find ink ribbons in
Resident Evil,
and harder enemies show up almost immediately. Let's take a second to talk about fixed perspective camera angles. I admire any developer, especially indie developers, who implement fixed camera angles in their game, especially in their horror games. It's hard to do. Devs have to be both a game designer and a cinematographer, ensuring they set up shots that not only look good, but visually flesh out an interactable environment. They're not just taking a picture, they're defining how the player moves across that picture. Screens have to be laid out congruently so that players aren't confused traveling across them. They have to convey what's important, what's not, and keep the player in frame, and relatively unobscured. It's an art unto itself. Take this game's library, for example. By my count, there's 10 screens that make up the whole of the room, and in most of those screens, there isn't much to interact with. They're there so that you feel like you're there. In an era where it's arguably easier to pin a camera to a player's shoulder and let them freely explore an environment, I appreciate the effort that goes into creating fixed camera angles. Save for some haphazard angles meant to make you struggle on purpose during an endgame fight, the Mute House is thoughtful with its framing. An ultra-wide screen, no less. Okay, rant over. There's some decent puzzle work here. They're not too esoteric, but you can't brute force your way through them. You actually have to pay attention to the clues given and work them out. The only one that caused me palpitations involved a piano, instantly giving me war flashbacks to the original Silent Hill. There's another that asks you to pay attention to symbols you find throughout the whole game. Since there's no record-keeping system in your inventory, you'll have to rely on screenshotting, or a good old legal pad. Before we continue, I'll be spoiling some late-game encounters. Here's a brief respite before we go on. There's a prolonged segment in this game where you run into these guys, who sort of look like Elegos from Ash vs. Evil Dead. They're mostly blind, but attracted to light and noise, forcing you to sneak around in the dark lest you're taken out in one hit. I actually think this is a good use of insta-kills, since it translates the tension found in hide-and-seek horror like Amnesia to an old-school framework. The fixed camera angles played against me here, and I had to rely on my ears whenever I couldn't see. And because I couldn't just blast these fucks, I had to be alert and careful. It's scary and effective, and adds variety to the game's overall loop. No. What I hated was having my head cleaved in two during this fucking fight. The boss you go up against is a massive bullet sponge, and the area is a confusing sprawl of corridors that bleed into each other. I learned very quickly how ungraceful Emily can be, and it cost me. I completely lost my patience with this fight. It happens towards the finale, and it makes it feel like such a momentum breaker. This being old school design, there's no checkpoints, so you have a decent trek before you can try again, hoping all the while he doesn't fucking do that. In a closing fight, I prefer more of a pit for pat where I can trade blows, manage my health, ammo, and placement in equal measure. Some of you might enjoy this pushback. I like a fairer fight. Rest assured, it's worth getting through this encounter so that you can get to the real battle. Another fucking fight where you can do that! It's really difficult to create a good boss fight in a fixed perspective game. Some of the best survival horror games have some of the worst boss fights imaginable. The Mute House doesn't escape this curse. I won't show you the other bosses, mainly because my girlfriend has arachnophobia, and she would really hate it if I did, but they're pretty lackluster affairs. At least they aren't. Up until its last act, I mostly enjoyed my stay at the Mute House. It has a strong foundation, but could do with some renovations. Honestly, I feel like an asshole being critical about its rougher edges, given the context that it's made by a self-proclaimed hobbyist who devoted 4 years of their life creating it. It's a good throwback with a shocking amount of visual detail, fun exploration, and a cat. That and it's modestly priced at $12.99. I'm excited to see what December Blues does next. No bones about it, this is an impressive debut that proves that they really get the fundamentals of classic survival horror. If Resident Evil were a song, then this is a garage band cover. I'll always prefer the original, but this one still kinda rocks. Once again, thank you for watching. I appreciate folks suggesting games to check out for future videos. There's a few I have my eye on, some have just released, others have been out for a while. We'll see where the winds take us, or whatever. But once again, thank you. Good night, and don't let the video games bite.